Welcome back. So next up, we are going to talk about a couple of text-based elements, and the first one is called the emphasis element. We write it using EM tags, EM for emphasis, and we use this whenever we want to add a stressed emphasis to a piece of text relative to its surrounding text. Now, there's a lot of situations where this can come up. By default, it will be styled with italics, but soon when we cover CSS, we'll see we can turn that off, we can change the color. So don't use it just to italicize something. Use it because it has a meaning when you want to stress something relative to the rest of the text. So a simple example is something like this, where we have just do it already. The do is wrapped in an EM, so just do it already. And for people with visual impairments who are approaching our website with a screen reader with software that's reading it out loud, they'll encounter that emphasis element, and it does read it differently. It implies some meaning. It adds meaning to our markup. What makes it a little confusing is that there's another element called the I element, which stands for idiomatic text element. At least that's what it stands for today. But with a tiny bit of history, I'll just explain what happened. Originally, there was no EM element. There was no emphasis element. We had the I element, which stood for italics. And we would use this to italicize text. And that still is the default behavior of the I element. It makes it italicized, whatever you wrap it around. But now we're not supposed to use it purely to make text italicized. There's been a movement in CSS in the last 1.5 decades or so to move away from adding styles in our markup. Just like an H1 should not be used to make text big, it should instead be used to indicate the main topic of your content. It has meaning, it has structure. The same is true here. So instead of using an italics element to make anything italicized, we can do all of that with CSS. And instead, we use elements to encode meaning in our documents, and we can make anything we want italicized with CSS. So this used to be called italics. Now it's called idiomatic text. Basically, I would use this element when we have things that are traditionally italicized, like technical terms, Latin terms like you see right here, right? Musa is one of 2 or 3 genera in the family Musaceae. I don't know how to read Latin out loud. It includes bananas and plantains, or the term bandwidth. This is italicized because it's supposed to be italicized when you have a keyword, right? It's offset from the regular text. This gets a little confusing. It honestly doesn't matter. Some people still today only use the I element, but we have the EM element, which we use whenever we're trying to actually add stress emphasis. So get out of bed now. We had to do something about it. This is not a drill. You wouldn't italicize those because they're keywords or Latin terms or taxonomical things like you would with the I element. So it is confusing. Good news is no one's going to report you if you use the wrong element. Just try and focus on the meaning of your text. So let's try an example. Let's do just a paragraph of text that says, I really need to get to bed. I'm going to emphasize really. So I'm going to wrap EM around it, just like that. And it will be italicized by default, as we see there. I really need to get to bed. We wouldn't use the I element there, although it will look exactly the same. It also italicizes it, but that implies a different meaning. When we use the EM, we're adding stress emphasis. And so this would be a better use case for it. Or even something like this, if we had an H1 that said something like, I am a designer and an engineer, which I would not say I'm a designer. If I want to stress designer and engineer, I could wrap them with EM elements. I wouldn't use an I element or idiomatic text, but instead I emphasize them with EM, even if the outcome is the same. I am a designer and an engineer, right? I'm making them stand out in some way. And then I could turn off the italics, I can change their color, I can make them bigger, add an underline, whatever I want using CSS. Then we have the I element. So a situation, I don't use it very often, but if I have something that needs to be traditionally italicized, so if I'm writing a web page about moose, there's a moose in my yard a couple days ago, and the Latin name is alces. I'm going to copy that. and put a piece of text in here that says, I just saw a moose. And then in parentheses, I'll put alces, and then I'll wrap that in an I element. And the same outcome, right? It's still italicized, but now it's not stressed. There's no emphasis relative to the rest of the text. It's just more, this is supposed to be italicized. So if I haven't confused you enough, which this is confusing, again, there's no hard rule that says you have to use an EM here, but that's a general pattern, and the general focus, the mindset in CSS and HTML has moved to separate styles from the markup. So instead of cluttering your markup by saying this is italicized, technically what we're saying is this is idiomatic text, and the default behavior is to italicize that, but we can change that. And we have a similar pair of confusing elements that have to do with bolding text. So there's an element called strong, which is a newer element, kind of like EM. We use this to indicate special significance. By default, it will be bolded by the browser, but you can also change that via CSS. So something like this. Whatever you do, do not let the cats out. That strength there is encoded by the strong element. It will be bolded, but more importantly, it says something about the content. It says that this is stronger, it's more important in some way, it's more significant than the rest of the text. And a screen reader will also recognize that and change the tone of its voice. So if you look at the strong element on Mozilla Developer Network, it tells us basically use it for strong importance, seriousness, urgency. So something like this. The rule you can never forget, no matter how much he cries, no matter how much he begs, never feed him after midnight. So you don't use this just to make something bold. You use it when you're trying to make something special and significant. Make sure to put on your safety goggles, right? So if I just copy this example from Mozilla Developer Network, we see that it is bolded, but of course I can change that. Before proceeding, make sure you put on your safety goggles. If you change your tone there, you get more serious or strong, you might want to use the strong element. But then we also have the B element, which used to be the bold element, kind of like the I element used to be for italics. But again, the trend, the mindset in HTML has moved away from using this purely to make something bold. It's been renamed to the bring attention to text element. It's a long name. You use it for things that are traditionally bolded, but only when there's not a more suitable element. So an example would be, this is an HTML course. Am I really making that stronger? Probably not. I could use a strong element, but I'm not trying to encode special significance. I guess I just want it to stand out a little bit or highlight it. This is an HTML course. So I'll show you an example of that. Let's just keep with my slides. In this course, you will learn, and then I'll make a B tag, HTML, and then I'll add a comma, and another B tag, CSS, a comma, and JS, although that's not really true. We only cover a tiny bit of JavaScript. And there we go. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are bolded. Our attention has been brought to them, but it's a different meaning than this, which has special strength. So it's all very confusing. I fully recognize that. The good news is we don't actually use much of these in the course, at least not that often. We'll use some EM elements to emphasize text, but I don't think we use a B or an I anywhere. So this is not something you really have to master now, but I'm just trying to be comprehensive and explain how that works, because it really is confusing. Back in the day, if you were learning this 20 years ago, we only had a bold tag and an italics tag. Those are gone now. Technically, they're renamed. And then we have strong and emphasis elements now that also make things bold and italicized. But of course, you can change it all.